I am delighted to introduce today's speaker, Thandiwe Wilson. She is Maasai Living Cultures and Taking Care Project Assistant, Pitt Rivers Museum. Graduating from the Institute of Archaeology, University College London, with an MSc in Bioarchaeological and Forensic Anthropology, Thandi has a background in heritage and most recently worked at the Pitt Rivers Museum on the Multaka project. Her areas of interest include audience engagement, collections care, and ethical practice in cultural heritage. Now, at this point, I will stop sharing, and I will also mute myself and turn off the video. Thandi, please take it away.
So welcome everyone. Can you see me clearly? There we are. Okay, super. So welcome everyone and thank you for joining us here today. Before I start, I'd like to thank the Institute of Conservation Ethnography Group for inviting me to speak here today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here to talk about a fantastic project called Multaka Oxford. So I'll be sharing some examples of how collaborative work using a collection called the Textiles from the Arab World collection donated by Dr. Jenny Balfour-Poole helped us think critically about collections practices and develop an online exhibition and also champion different perspectives in museum spaces. So Multaka Oxford is an inclusive volunteering project delivered jointly by the History of Science Museum and Pitt Rivers Museum, where we work in a three-way partnership with staff and volunteers in the local community. And the programme has been running now since 2016 and has supported over 60 local people, many of whom recently settled in Oxford. The project aims to bring different voices and new interpretations of objects in two collections, the Islamic Scientific Instruments at the History of Science Museum and the Textiles from the Arab World collection at the Pitt Rivers Museum. The museums are essentially meeting points for people to come together and share their experiences, their knowledge, their skills, and their interests. And therefore we call the project Multaka because Multaka translates from Arabic to English as meeting point. There are lots of ways that people have begun volunteering with the project. We advertise roles through the Oxford Gardens, Libraries and Museums volunteering service. And people have also been referred to the project via our partners at Aspire, Asylum Welcome, Connection Support and Refugee Resource. As collections officer, it was my job to catalogue the collection and explore new opportunities for volunteers to work with material culture. Part of this included enhancing the museum database, so essentially working alongside volunteers to develop new interpretations, which provided deeper, more meaningful understanding and appreciation for the collection. With the arts and heritage sector aiming to develop and collaborative models that were more equitable, it was very much at the forefront of our minds that all stakeholders had to benefit equally to influence institutional, organizational change. It was imperative that our collaborative work also provided opportunities to build confidence and develop useful transferable skills, such as computer or social media skills, communication, teamwork, and general work experience. There are many benefits to working with a people-centered approach. The Pitt Rivers has been doing a lot of work to address labelling and cultural group names, classifications, and facilitate opportunities for people represented in our museum to exercise agency and self-representation and have their voices more centralised. There were a few moments where, when I was working on the project, infrastructure, mainly the database, made me question our fundamental approaches in collections work. For example, we have and continue to classify and organise material culture using ethnocentric typologies and often focus on the voice of the collector. So the project provided a great opportunity to bring diverse voices and new insights, which contributed additional knowledge and recontextualization into the museum. So the Textiles from the Arab World collection includes material that Dr. Jenny Balfour-Paul, a researcher, indigo expert and artist, collected while living and traveling around the Middle East, North and West Africa in the 1970s through to the 1990s. It's not just a collection of textiles, it also includes quite a bit of pottery, metalwork and photography from Syria, Palestine, Yemen, Oman, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Tunisia, Senegal, Gambia, Mali and Sudan. And last March, in response to the current pandemic, the Multaka team began to think of new ways of working with each other in the collection. Although we were no longer able to meet in the museums, we drew on one of our many strengths, which was communication. And so despite the situation, we continued to come together in a virtual capacity. It was also in this time that a new role was created at the Pitt Rivers Museum, a digital research role. The work I'll share today was developed from research that Multaka digital volunteers undertook independently and remotely over a period of 4 months. Their research demonstrated the value of sharing expertise, significantly enhancing our understanding of the collection. So when we started going digital, sharing the collection on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook, 2 things started to happen. So firstly, we found that Twitter was a brilliant platform for Jenny and Multaka volunteers to speak to each other, with people often sharing anecdotal stories and Jenny speaking about her travels and giving us fun, interesting details about the objects that she donated to the museum. On the left is a photograph from 1975, and on the right a video from 2020, sent to the project by Rimala from Hamasseria. These humongous water wheels are called Noaya and are an absolute feat of engineering and a design which dates back to the 1st century. One of our volunteers, Matty, an engineer, spent months creating his own scaled down working model, which you will find in the Weaving Collections exhibition online. We shared this photograph online on Twitter, and Jenny, thinking back to the 1970s, when she took the photo, wondered if they were still in working order and, commented this. And Naran, one of our Multaka volunteers, replied saying yes, and adding, "Did you know that the people of Hama cannot sleep if they don't hear the sound of the water wheels?" Now the name Noaya translates as growler, and when I play this video, you may see why it's such a fitting name. So from water wheels in the landscape to water wheels in textiles. This stob is decorated with a combination of hand and machine embroidery, consisting of geometric patterns and 2 sweet little lovebirds there on the chest panel facing each other. And another design of water wheels, which you can see on the left, this design circling the triangular pattern in the very center of the chest. Of course, I can't show you the collection and not include the magic of indigo, which inspired Jenny's research. So this is a very striking dress, and it was actually very difficult for our wonderful photographer, Susie Pryor, to take a photograph of because it was so reflective, and you can see how shiny the fabric is there. And also these tiny little shimmering brass sequins are embellishing the dress, including a mother of pearl shell as well at the very top. circling the collar there. So it is in fact cotton. The shine is achieved by indigo paste being rubbed onto the cloth with a brush and then being beaten with these heavy wooden mallet beaters, as you can see on the picture of the right. So the process stiffens the fabric and creates this really lovely luminous sheen. Dresses like this are reserved for weddings and feast days, and once the sheen wears away, you can re-dye them and have them beaten again, but perhaps not this one with all its lovely little brass sequins. Protection from the evil eye is prevalent in the textiles and jewellery in the collection. For example, the Hand of Fatima amulets from Tunisia and the use of brass sequins and pieces of mother-of-pearl shell, which are used to embellish textiles. To provide a little context, the evil eye is essentially a concept of malice intent or ill fortune or illness or envy being directed towards someone. And to protect themselves from the people from the evil eye, embroidered motifs and decorations and amulets or reflective surfaces are worn to repel such misfortune. This is a bridal outfit and a wedding basket decorated with mother-of-pearl buttons and silk thread. Following on from the concept of protection of ill fortune, the sun is a really common motif in Siouan embroidery. Mother-of-pearl shells called tuntinfunt, meaning the eye of the sun, reflect sunshine and create this protective barrier of light over the wearer. So buttons have to be bright white when they're chosen and free of any blemishes or discolorization, and are often arranged in sunburst patterns. And on the right-hand image, you can see hand, fish, star, and sun motifs, and these are all symbols of protection and fertility. Again, solar imagery that you can see radiating from the chest like rays from the sun. So Jenny shared that this was one of her favorite outfits, having worn it at parties in the 1970s, and it dates back to the 1920s and was purchased from Amman in 1974. It's a really lovely example of Tatris. Tatris is the word for embroidery in Arabic, and here refers to embroidery specifically from Palestine. Many volunteers wrote about how these motifs within the cross stitch can identify family, age, social status, and location. As Multaka volunteer Sally said, Palestinian clothing is extremely rich in embroidery, and each city and village has its own tradition with distinctive and unique outfits which express their environment, a skill which is taught and practiced through the generations. So you'll note on the right-hand image how neat the back of the cross stitch is, and this uniform neatness throughout is very telling of this Tatris technique. A few reasons for this are to minimize discomfort against bare skin. The dress will no doubt be lighter as you're using less thread, so it's also very economical. So this is a photograph of Jenny Balfour Paul with Potter Juma bint Mohammed. And in her hands is an earthenware tortoise that she's made. Actually, both of those objects in that photograph are in the collection at the Pitt Rivers Museum. I'm quite fond of this little tortoise. Unfortunately, it had a fair amount of old damage to it, where the head and the hind right leg had been previously broken and rehadered. And in the bottom reference image, you can see clearly that the head was no longer attached to it, and there was a hairline fracture in the right hind leg. I approached Andy Hughes, who's the Deputy Head of Conservation at the Pitt Rivers Museum, and he managed to stabilize it to prevent any further damage. And he didn't replace any material around the breaks. He simply secured the head using a conservation standard adhesive, paraloid B72 in acetone, which would make the repair reversible if necessary. The old leg repairs were still very secure, so didn't require any retouches. My affinity for this little creature was not misplaced, because as volunteers Lynn and Sana both noticed, the tortoise is a sign of luck and a symbol of wisdom and good health. The collection was predominantly from the Middle East. However, Jenny also donated a few objects from West Africa, and this was one that really captivated volunteers. So bogolam fini are made from long strips of white cotton, which are weaved separately and then sewn together and painted with fermented mud to make patterns in this negative relief. So they're very beautiful and require a great deal of skill to manufacture. And Sana spoke about, Multaka volunteer Sana spoke about the commercialization of this type of cloth, which began in the 1970s, and the contemporary use of traditional Malian cloth worn by famous African-American celebrities like Michelle Obama and Beyonce. And Multaka volunteer Haf spoke about how bogolam fini were reflective of the land and environment for which they had come from. The earth, the plants, the heat from the sun and the sweat of the labor. While Lynn here speaks about language that's embodied in these patterns. So this next slide takes us through a journey across the world from Damascus in Syria to Mumbai, India, and then Vietnam. In the lower right-hand corner is a photograph of 2 copper containers and a rather ornate sponge bath from Damascus that are sat on my desk. These were some of the first objects that I began cataloguing when I joined the team. Above that is a professional photograph of the largest vessel. And you can see there some of those incredible little etchings in the copper. So safatas, also known as tiffin tins in India, are lunchboxes with several stacked tiers, which are used to separate different foods like rice from vegetables and meats, etc. I've included a poem here from Antoinette called White Rice, which is a poem about her Vietnamese father, which she was inspired to write while researching tiffin tins and the logistics involved in delivering lunch to 200,000 people in Mumbai daily. And Naran produced a piece of research focused on the history of the industry and the etymology of the word safatas, which translates to traveling vessel. She even provided these pictures on the left-hand side from her cousin's antique store in Damascus. And I'll just read this poem out for you. Can you cook some rice? The al dente way, like the Italians do. Don't put too much water. We don't have to run away anymore. We can let it sit overnight and eat it tomorrow too. The spirits are dancing tonight, Ba. They're mingling in smoke, clouds up to the ceiling. Why do they have to leave us, Ba? I want them to come for dinner at least and eat with us one last time and stay here forever. Really. So I'm going to speak briefly about this brocade scarf and how it came to be in the museum. Brocade is typically woven by hand using gold and silver thread and silk, and Damascus was renowned for its brocade industry. This was gifted to Naran from a friend back home and donated to the museum in 2019. It was also on display during the previous Multaka physical exhibition called Connecting Threads. I wasn't personally involved in this acquisition. Much of this process was down to Megan O'Brien-Backhouse, who was deputy head of collections at the time, and Abigail Flack, who was the previous collections officer for Multaka and did some really incredible work on the project before I joined. So let's talk about the process of donating to a museum. So decisions are made dependent on whether there is a gap in the museum collection, certainly the amount of storage that is available, and the standard of support that we can provide in terms of conservation and doing justice to the object and its story. It just so happened that this was representative of the industry in the late 21st century, an example of the gap that the museum had. Not only this, Niran expressed that the museum would be a place where her heritage could be celebrated and protected. The scarf was also brand new and in excellent condition, which of course had implications for conservation and wouldn't take up much room in the textile store either, once it had come off display. As many of you know, unfortunately, there's not much room in the cases at the Pitt. So this brings me to something that Mohammed Alawad expressed, which I believe holds true to the dialogue, not monogolism, of the earlier curation that we are encouraging with Multaka. Museums conserve and serve human heritage. I'm giving my story as part of this human contemporary heritage. We're becoming part of this heritage, but giving it a contemporary view. Everything I've shared with you today is in the Weaving Connections online exhibition, which you can find on the Pitt Rivers website. And just a reminder, it's online only. None of these objects or textiles are on display. It's a great example of co-curation and how this work translates in a curatorial capacity as a multivocal exhibition incorporating research and first-hand experience from 4 curators, 15 volunteers, and the collector herself, Jenny Balfour-Paul. We found the process of including lots of voices very fruitful, and that Jenny Balfour-Paul's research, supported by these many perspectives, revealed multifaceted stories and new narratives. The exhibition itself is interactive with lots of ways to navigate and journey through the online galleries. There are lots of buttons where you can read participants' responses to exhibition items. You can watch recorded footage. You can see photographs from both volunteers and the museum. We've also included poetry and drawings that all touch on this cross-cultural connections throughout history, looking at technique, contemporary relevance, spiritual and social significance, and also including personal stories along the way. I'll also add that the designers, Creative J, were very present throughout the process, being at all our meetings, including consultation processes with digital volunteers. And they listened and provided a lot of support, clarity and direction where was needed. And during the consultation process, when we were putting this exhibition together, we had a lot of conversations with digital researchers about ensuring that we were ensuring balance. Using non-hierarchical interactive buttons, we spoke about the inclusion of landscapes and people and names and how we were going to credit volunteers. We also discussed how myself and Faye Beasley would input all their work into the museum database as the Deputy Head of Collections. And unfortunately, something that did come up which we were unable to achieve simply because of funding and timing was the use of multiple languages for accessibility, which we were able to achieve in the physical display, the Connecting Threads exhibition. I would also say that our turnaround for the exhibition was incredibly fast, around 3 months. And there wasn't enough time to ensure that we were working with volunteers, at every stage, from inception to design to promotion and marketing. Regarding the title, the curators found this one of the most difficult decisions. It took months, and we only decided on Weaving Connections, local perspectives on collections from the Middle East, North and West Africa, a week before the launch. And it took this long because we worked as a committee, and we felt it was important to choose a new title than use the collection title in order to acknowledge all the cultural groups, countries and material culture represented in the online galleries. This title was also a nod to Connecting Threads because both these exhibitions highlighted our value for dialogue between cultures. Finally, the use of local can be understood in 2 ways. Firstly, meaning local to the countries they originated, and equally local, referring to our community in Oxford and to the many people who have settled here. We also have a downloadable exhibition catalogue, which showcases all the information in this handy PDF document. And these 2 pages are from this catalogue, and I hope that they demonstrate the range of information that you can see in the exhibition. If you do decide to visit, please feel free to take part in our survey, as this is the first time that we put an online exhibition like this together. And so we're very keen to hear what you have to say, because your experience matters. You know, we're here to entertain you, and your input will help us develop better exhibitions, better online exhibitions in the future. So I'd like to end by quoting Navigator Nlavu. The Middle East and Africa are often portrayed in a negative light. Weaving Connections, however, expresses and celebrates the sophistication of cultures in these countries. For me, Weaving Connections means we are stronger together when we combine our efforts, intelligence and artistry. The process of weaving involves a similar concept, interlacing thread to create a beautiful and attractive pattern. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. I'll try and answer as many questions as possible. I may not be able to answer them all, so I've included my contact details here if you'd like to learn more about the project.